narrative.
300 miles from home, standing in front of a rustic cabin with nothing but a backpack and the sound of car doors slamming shut behind me. That's where my wife's family thought their little joke would end. They were wrong. It started 6 months earlier when my wife brought up the annual family retreat. Every year, her relatives gathered at this remote cabin for what they called bonding time. I'd managed to avoid it for 3 years straight, always finding convenient work conflicts or other obligations. This year was different. She insisted I come, saying her parents specifically requested my presence. "They really want to get to know you better," she said, those innocent eyes making it impossible to refuse. It would mean everything to me. So I agreed. Big mistake. The drive up was strange from the start. Normally, her family was loud and chaotic during car trips, but this time they kept exchanging glances in the rearview mirror. Her brother would whisper something to her sister, then they'd both snicker quietly. Her parents maintained this weird, forced conversation about the weather and gas prices. I should have trusted my instincts when her father kept asking if I'd brought enough clothes for an extended stay. When I asked what he meant, he just laughed it off. You never know what might happen up there. The cabin sat on 40 acres of practically nothing. No cell towers nearby, no neighbors for miles, just trees and a dirt road that disappeared into the wilderness. The place had been in their family for decades, passed down from her grandfather who apparently enjoyed isolation more than human contact. We unloaded the cars, and I noticed they'd packed significantly more supplies than usual. Multiple coolers, extra blankets, enough food for 2 weeks instead of the typical weekend trip. When I mentioned it, her mother just smiled and said they wanted to be prepared for anything. That first evening felt off. During dinner, conversations would stop abruptly when I entered the room. Her father kept checking his watch like he was waiting for something. Her brother couldn't make eye contact without grinning. The whole family seemed to be sharing some inside joke that I wasn't part of. After we went to bed, I heard whispering from the next room, hushed voices discussing tomorrow morning and making sure he doesn't suspect anything. I convinced myself I was being paranoid. These people had welcomed me into their family, treated me well for years. Surely I was misreading the situation. The next morning proved I wasn't paranoid enough. I woke up to find the family already dressed and loading their cars. When I asked what was happening, they exchanged those looks again. Her father stepped forward with that same forced smile he'd been wearing all weekend. "We've decided to head back early," he announced. "Work calls, you know how it is." Something felt wrong. "Okay, let me grab my stuff." That's when her brother started laughing. Not a polite chuckle, but a full belly laugh like he'd just heard the funniest joke of his life. Her sister joined in, then her mother. Soon the whole family was laughing except my wife, who was staring at the ground with what looked like guilt. "What's so funny?" I asked. Her father cleared his throat, still grinning. "The thing is, you're not coming with us. This is what we call a character-building exercise. Think of it as a modern rite of passage." The words didn't process immediately. "What do you mean?" "We're leaving you here," her mother explained cheerfully, like she was announcing dessert. "For a week. Maybe 2, depending on how long it takes you to figure things out." My wife finally looked up. "It's just a test. My family thinks you've had things too easy, that you need to prove yourself. They want to see if you can handle real adversity." The casual cruelty of it hit me like a physical blow. They'd planned this elaborate setup just to abandon me in the middle of nowhere like some twisted survival show. All those whispered conversations, the extra supplies they'd packed for themselves, the forced smiles, it had all been building to this moment. "You're joking," I said, though their faces made it clear they weren't. Her brother pulled out his phone and started recording. "We want to document your reaction for posterity. Don't worry, there's enough food in the cabin for about 4 days. After that, you'll need to get creative. There's a stream about half a mile north for water," her sister added helpfully. "And we left you some basic tools in case you want to try hunting or fishing." They honestly expected me to beg. I could see it in their eyes, the anticipation of watching me break down and plead for them to stay. They wanted me to prove their point that I was soft, dependent, incapable of handling real challenges. Instead, I walked to the porch and sat down on the steps. "That's it?" her father asked, clearly disappointed by my lack of dramatic reaction. "What did you expect?" I replied calmly. "Some fight, maybe some anger," her brother said, still recording. "This is supposed to be a big moment for you." I looked at my wife, who couldn't meet my eyes. "How long have you all been planning this?" "About 6 months," she admitted quietly. Ever since Dad said you seemed too comfortable, too used to having everything handed to you. 6 months of lies. 6 months of planning my humiliation like it was a family vacation. They'd smiled at me across dinner tables, made small talk at birthday parties, all while secretly designing this elaborate punishment for the crime of existing in their daughter's life. Well, I said, standing up and brushing off my jeans, I guess you better get going before it gets dark. The family exchanged confused looks. This wasn't the script they'd written in their heads. You're not going to try to stop us? Her mother asked. Why would I do that? They loaded into their cars, still expecting some last-minute breakdown, some desperate plea for forgiveness or rescue. Her brother kept the camera rolling, waiting for the money shot of me running after their cars like an abandoned dog. I waved goodbye from the porch. As their taillights disappeared down the dirt road, leaving nothing but dust and silence, I realized something that probably should have terrified me. Instead of panic or despair, I felt something much more dangerous. Relief. The silence after their cars disappeared was deafening. Not the uncomfortable kind of silence you get in awkward conversations, but the profound quiet of being completely alone for the first time in years. No background chatter, no TV noise, no constant buzz of notifications. Just me and 40 acres of wilderness. I walked back into the cabin and took inventory of what they'd left behind. 4 days of food, they'd said, but that was assuming I ate like I normally did. Canned goods, some bread, basic staples. A manual can opener, some utensils, matches, and a first aid kit. They'd even left me a hunting knife, probably thinking I'd cut myself trying to whittle a stick. The cabin itself was more substantial than I'd given it credit for. Solid wood construction, a stone fireplace that actually worked, and a hand-pumped well in the kitchen that produced clean water. The place had been built by people who understood self-sufficiency, back when that was a necessity rather than a YouTube hobby. I found a stack of old journals in a cabinet, filled with entries from previous family visits dating back decades. Most were boring accounts of fishing trips and family drama, but a few contained useful information about the area. Locations of edible plants, the best fishing spots, notes about wildlife patterns. My phone showed no signal, which I'd expected, but more importantly, it had a GPS function that worked even without cell service. I spent the afternoon mapping the area, marking the stream they'd mentioned, and exploring the dirt roads that connected to the main highway. That evening, I built a fire and cooked a simple meal. As I sat on the porch watching the sunset, my phone buzzed with a satellite internet connection the cabin apparently had. A message from my wife appeared. How are you holding up? Hope you're not too mad about this. I stared at the message for a long time. The casual tone, like she'd forgotten to mention a dinner reservation change instead of orchestrating my abandonment. I typed back a single word. Fine. An hour later, another message. Dad wants to know if you need anything. There's a town about 15 miles south if you want to walk there. 15 miles. They'd researched the area enough to know exactly how far I'd have to walk to reach civilization. This wasn't a spontaneous prank. It was a calculated psychological experiment designed to break me down systematically. I didn't respond. The next morning, I decided to find that town myself, but not on foot like some desperate castaway. I spent an hour examining the property more carefully and discovered something her family had either forgotten or never known about. Hidden behind the cabin was an old motorcycle under a tarp, probably left by the grandfather decades ago. It took most of the day to get it running. The engine was solid, but the fuel system needed cleaning and the battery was dead. Fortunately, I'd spent enough time working on engines in my younger years to know what I was doing. By late afternoon, I had transportation. The town turned out to be a small mountain community that existed primarily to serve hunters, fishermen, and the occasional tourist. One main street with a general store, a diner, a small motel, and a gas station. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business within hours. I walked into the diner and ordered coffee. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with graying hair and curious eyes, immediately pegged me as an outsider. You staying up at the old cabin? She asked. For now. Don't get many visitors this time of year. Most folks wait until hunting season. I explained my situation, carefully editing out the more humiliating details. I was staying at the cabin for a few weeks, needed some supplies, wondered about work opportunities in the area. Her eyes lit up. Funny you should ask. We just lost our morning cook last week. Owner's been scrambling to cover breakfast shifts. Within an hour, I was talking to the diner's owner, a gruff man who cared more about whether I could handle a grill than my life story. He offered me morning shifts starting the next day, cash under the table, meals included. That evening, I rode the motorcycle back to the cabin with fresh supplies and a job lined up. My phone showed 17 missed messages from my wife and her family. I scrolled through them without opening any, watching the progression from casual check-ins to growing concern. The last message from her father read, "This has gone on long enough. Call us back." I deleted all the messages and turned off the phone. The next morning, I started work at the diner. The early shift meant being there by 5 a.m., but it also meant I was done by noon with the rest of the day to myself. The work was straightforward: eggs, bacon, pancakes, coffee refills. The regulars were mostly local workers, friendly enough once they realized I wasn't some city tourist playing at country life. By my third day, I'd established a routine. Work in the morning, explore the area in the afternoon, quiet evenings by the fire reading those old journals. The simplicity was addictive. No office politics, no complex social dynamics, no elaborate family games designed to prove points about character. My wife called 4 times that day. I finally answered on the 4th call. "Thank God," she said. "We've been worried sick. Why haven't you been answering?" "I've been busy." "Busy? You're supposed to be stuck in the middle of nowhere with nothing to do." "I found things to do." A long pause. "What kind of things? Does it matter?" "Of course it matters." This whole exercise was supposed to teach you something about self-reliance and perseverance. If you're just sitting around feeling sorry for yourself, you're missing the point. The casual arrogance in her voice was stunning. Even now, she was trying to frame my abandonment as a learning opportunity one should be grateful for. "I'm learning plenty," I said. "Good. So when do you want us to come get you?" "Dad thinks a week is enough to make the point." "I don't." "You don't what?" "I don't want you to come get me." Another pause, longer this time. "What do you mean?" "I mean I'm staying here for a while. Maybe permanently." The explosion of protests that followed was predictable. I was being dramatic. I was missing the point. I was taking this too seriously. But underneath the protests, I heard something else. Panic. This wasn't how their little psychological experiment was supposed to end. I hung up and turned off the phone again. That night, sitting by the fire with a book and a glass of whiskey I'd bought in town, I realized something that should have worried me. I wasn't counting the days until I could go home anymore. I was counting the days since I'd felt this peaceful. By the end of my first week at the diner, I'd become something of a local curiosity. Word travels fast in small towns, and everyone knew about the city guy who'd been abandoned at the old cabin and decided to stick around. What surprised them was how well I was adapting. The diner owner offered me additional shifts covering lunch. A local contractor mentioned he could use help with a cabin renovation project on weekends. The general store owner asked if I'd be interested in handling their evening inventory once a week. Suddenly, I had more work opportunities than I'd had back home. My phone remained off most of the time, but when I did check it, the messages had evolved from concern to frustration to outright anger. Her brother had left a voicemail calling me childish. Her mother had sent a long text about family loyalty and forgiveness. Her father had progressed to threats about coming up there himself to drag me back to reality. But it was my wife's messages that revealed how completely they'd misunderstood the situation. "I know you're angry, and you have every right to be," one text read. "But proving your point by sulking isn't going to fix anything. We can talk about this like adults when you come home." Sulking. That's what she thought this was. I finally called her back after 10 days. "Where have you been?" she demanded immediately. "Do you have any idea how worried we've been?" "I've been working." "Working? What are you talking about?" "I got a job at a local diner. Also helping with some construction work on weekends." The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. "You got a job," she repeated slowly. "You're supposed to be learning a lesson about hardship, not starting a new career. Maybe I learned a different lesson than the one you intended. This is ridiculous. You're acting like a child who ran away from home. Pack your things and come back. We can discuss this properly when you're thinking clearly." "I'm thinking clearly. Probably more clearly than I have in years." "What's that supposed to mean?" I looked out the cabin window at the mountains in the distance, painted gold by the setting sun. "It means I like it here. The work is honest, the people are straightforward, and nobody plays psychological games for entertainment." "We weren't playing games. We were trying to help you grow as a person. By abandoning me in the wilderness as a joke?" "It wasn't a joke, It was a learning experience. And clearly it worked, since you're showing more independence than you ever did at home. The twisted logic was fascinating. Even my success was being reframed as proof that their cruelty had been justified. You're right, I said. I am showing more independence. Starting with the independence to choose whether I want to be part of this family anymore. You don't mean that, don't I? I hung up and turned the phone off again. That weekend, I helped the contractor renovate a vacation cabin about 5 miles from my current location. The work was physical and demanding, but satisfying in a way my old job had never been. At the end of each day, you could see exactly what you'd accomplished. No abstract metrics, no political maneuvering, just walls that were straighter and roofs that didn't leak. The contractor, a weathered man in his 60s, worked alongside me without much conversation. On Sunday afternoon, as we wrapped up the project, he finally spoke up. "You're not bad at this," he said. "Ever think about learning the trade properly? I might be interested. There's good money in it up here. Rich folks from the city keep buying mountain properties, and most of them need serious work. I've got more projects lined up than I can handle." He offered to teach me the skills I'd need in exchange for labor on current jobs. Within 6 months, he estimated, I could be working independently. The pay would be better than what I'd been making in my old corporate job, and the cost of living up here was a fraction of what I'd been spending in the city. That night, I called my wife one more time. "Finally," she answered. "I was starting to think you'd lost your mind completely. I wanted to let you know I'm not coming back. Stop being dramatic. Of course you're coming back. I'm serious. I've found work here. I'm learning new skills, and I'm happier than I've been in years. You've been gone for 2 weeks. That's not enough time to make life-changing decisions. Your family made a life-changing decision for me when they drove away and left me here. I'm just following through on the logical conclusion." The logical conclusion was supposed to be you realizing how good you had it at home and appreciating us more. Instead, I realized how much better life could be without people who think abandoning someone is an acceptable form of entertainment. Her voice rose to a near shout. "We are your family. You can't just throw away years of marriage because of one mistake." "One mistake? You spent 6 months planning this. You lied to me for half a year, convinced me to trust you, then abandoned me in the wilderness for fun. That's not a mistake. That's a pattern of behavior. We were trying to help you. By humiliating me? By treating me like a lab rat in some twisted psychology experiment? By recording my reaction for your amusement? You're blowing this completely out of proportion. Am I? Let me ask you something. When you were planning this little adventure, did any of you consider that I might not find it funny? Did anyone suggest that maybe abandoning your son-in-law in the middle of nowhere might be cruel rather than helpful?" Another long silence. "We thought you'd be grateful eventually," she said quietly. "Grateful? For being abandoned. For being forced to discover your own strength. I discovered my own strength, all right. And I discovered that I'm strong enough to walk away from people who think cruelty is the same thing as love." I hung up for the final time. 3 days later, a truck pulled into the cabin's driveway. Through the window, I watched her father and brother climb out, both looking grim and determined. They'd come to collect their wayward family member and restore the natural order of things. I stepped onto the porch to meet them and immediately noticed their surprise. In 3 weeks, I'd lost weight, gained muscle definition from the physical work, and acquired what the locals called a mountain tan. I looked healthier and more confident than I had in years. "You look different," her father said, clearly not sure if that was good or bad. "Clean living will do that." Her brother stepped forward aggressively. "Enough games. Time to come home and face reality." I crossed my arms and didn't move from the porch. "This is reality. You're the ones living in a fantasy where abandoning people is an acceptable family tradition. We came here to bring you back," her father said, "one way or another." "And how exactly do you plan to do that?" They exchanged glances, realizing they hadn't thought this through. What were they going to do? Kidnap me? Drag me kicking and screaming to their car like a rebellious teenager? "You can't stay here forever," her brother said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Why not? I've got work, I've got housing, I've got a community that treats me with respect. What exactly am I supposed to be missing about my old life?" Neither of them had an answer for that. Her father and brother stood in my driveway for 20 minutes, trying different approaches to convince me to leave. First came the guilt trip about family obligations, then practical concerns about my job and apartment back home. Finally, barely veiled threats about what would happen if I didn't come to my senses. I listened patiently from the porch, arms crossed, letting them exhaust their arguments. When they finished, I offered them coffee. The gesture seemed to confuse them more than outright hostility would have. "We're not here for coffee," her father said. "We're here to bring you home." "And I'm here by choice," I replied. "Interesting how that works." They left 20 minutes later, frustrated and empty-handed. I watched their truck disappear down the dirt road, knowing this was far from over. People like them don't accept defeat gracefully. I was right. Over the next week, my wife called repeatedly, cycling through every emotional manipulation technique in the book. Tears, anger, bargaining, threats. She'd apparently convinced herself that I was having some kind of mental breakdown and would eventually snap out of it. The breakthrough came when she mentioned therapy. "I've been talking to someone about this situation," she said during one call. "A professional who specializes in relationship trauma. She thinks you might be experiencing a form of Stockholm Syndrome, but in reverse. You're identifying with your isolation instead of recognizing that we're trying to help you. You're in therapy because I found a job and got happy. You're in therapy because you abandoned your family over a harmless prank." "I abandoned my family. That's interesting, considering you're the ones who literally drove away and left me here." "That was temporary. This is permanent. Don't you see the difference?" "I see the difference perfectly. You abandoned me expecting me to fail and come crawling back. I didn't fail, so now you're trying to reframe my success as mental illness." The conversation ended with her promising to get more aggressive about intervention options. I took that as a threat and decided it was time to make my position more official. The next morning, I drove the motorcycle to the county courthouse in the larger town about an hour away. I filed papers to establish residency, registered to vote, and opened a local bank account. If they wanted to escalate this situation, I'd be ready. I also stopped by a lawyer's office and had a consultation about my legal rights. The attorney, a sharp woman in her 40s who specialized in family law, listened to my story with growing amazement. "Let me understand this correctly," she said. "Your wife's family lured you to an isolated location under false pretenses, then abandoned you there as a joke, and now they're threatening forced intervention because you chose to stay?" "That's accurate." "And you have evidence of this?" "Recordings, messages, witnesses." I showed her the video her brother had taken of my initial reaction, which he'd posted on social media, thinking it was hilarious. I also had screenshots of all the text messages and voicemails they'd sent. "This is actually actionable," she said. "What they did could constitute false imprisonment, abandonment, and potentially criminal conspiracy, depending on how you want to pursue it." I wasn't interested in criminal charges, but I did want legal protection against any forced intervention attempts. She drew up a cease and desist letter and helped me establish documentation that I was of sound mind and acting voluntarily. 2 weeks later, my wife and her entire family showed up at the cabin unannounced. This time they brought reinforcements, a social worker they'd somehow convinced to do a welfare check, and what appeared to be a private counselor. I watched from the kitchen window as they climbed out of 3 separate vehicles, clearly planning some kind of coordinated intervention. The social worker looked uncomfortable, like someone who'd been misled about the nature of this visit. I walked out to meet them, carrying the legal documents my attorney had prepared. "Quite a delegation," I said calmly. The social worker stepped forward. "Sir, I'm here because there are concerns about your welfare and mental state. Your family believes you may be in crisis." "Do I look like I'm in crisis?" She studied me carefully. I was clean, healthy, obviously well-fed, and completely coherent. The cabin behind me was neat and well-maintained. The motorcycle in the driveway was clean and functional. Nothing about the scene suggested distress or incapacity. "You look fine," she admitted, "but your family is very concerned about the circumstances." "Let me save everyone some time," I said, handing her the legal documents. "I'm here voluntarily. I'm employed. I'm mentally competent, and I have legal representation. This isn't a wellness check, it's harassment." My wife stepped forward aggressively. "You can't hide behind lawyers forever. This is our marriage we're talking about. Our marriage ended the moment you conspired with your family to abandon me in the wilderness. Everything since then has just been paperwork." Her mother started crying on cue. "We just wanted to help you become more independent." "Mission accomplished," I said dryly. "I'm so independent I don't need any of you anymore." The counselor they'd brought spoke up for the first time. "Sometimes people make rash decisions when they're hurt. Have you considered that this might be an overreaction to what was essentially a misunderstanding? A misunderstanding? Let me ask you something, doctor. If someone convinced you to go on a family trip, then drove away and left you stranded 300 miles from home as a joke, would you call that a misunderstanding? Well, when you put it that way, that's exactly what happened. They planned it for 6 months, lied to me repeatedly, then recorded my reaction for their entertainment. The only misunderstanding here is their assumption that I'd be desperate enough to forgive them. Her brother, who'd been unusually quiet, finally exploded. This is insane. You're throwing away your entire life because you can't take a joke. I'm not throwing away my life. I'm upgrading it. The job I have here pays better than my old job. The cost of living is lower. The people are honest. And nobody thinks psychological torture qualifies as family bonding. You're being ridiculous. Am I? Let me tell you what's ridiculous. Driving 6 hours to harass someone who's obviously doing well. Bringing a social worker to investigate a man who's employed, healthy, and living independently. Refusing to accept that your little prank backfired spectacularly. The social worker was already walking back to her car. I'm satisfied that this gentleman is acting voluntarily and is in no immediate danger. This isn't a matter for social services. The counselor followed her, clearly uncomfortable with being used as a prop in this family drama. That left me facing my wife and her family alone. This ends now, her father said, his voice low and threatening. You've made your point. Time to come home. Or what? Or we make things very difficult for you. I smiled. You already tried that. How did it work out? For the first time since this whole thing started, I saw something in their eyes that wasn't anger or frustration. It was the dawning realization that they had no power here. They played their biggest card when they abandoned me, expecting it to break me. Instead, it had freed me. And now they were standing in my driveway, on my property, begging me to come back to a life I discovered I didn't want. The tables had turned completely. My wife broke first. You want to know the truth? She screamed, her composure finally cracking. We did this because you were boring. You never took risks, never stood up for yourself, never showed any backbone. We thought maybe if we pushed you hard enough, you'd finally grow a spine. The family went silent. This wasn't part of their script. There it is, I said quietly. The real reason. Not character building or helping me grow. You were embarrassed by me. Her father tried to salvage the situation. That's not what she meant. No, that's exactly what she meant. And you know what? She was right. I was boring. I was passive. I let people walk all over me because I thought that's what good husbands do. I stepped off the porch and walked closer to them. But here's what you didn't count on. When you abandoned me here, you didn't just test my survival skills. You showed me exactly what you really thought of me. And more importantly, you showed me what life feels like when I stop caring what you think. We were trying to help, her mother protested. By humiliating me? By treating me like a failed science experiment? By recording my breakdown for your entertainment? You didn't break down, her brother said accusingly, like that was somehow cheating. Exactly. I didn't break down. I built up. And that terrifies you because it means your little psychological game backfired completely. I gestured toward the cabin, the motorcycle, the well-maintained property. You expected to find me broken, desperate, grateful to be rescued. Instead, you found me thriving, working, happy, independent in ways I never was when I was trying to please all of you. This isn't real independence, her father argued. This is just hiding from responsibility. What responsibility? My responsibility to tolerate being treated like garbage? My responsibility to pretend your cruelty was kindness? My responsibility to be grateful for being abandoned? My wife started crying, but these weren't the manipulative tears she'd used on the phone. These were the tears of someone who realized they'd lost something they couldn't get back. I love you, she said desperately. We can work through this. People make mistakes. Some mistakes you can work through. Others reveal who people really are. This was the second kind. So that's it. Years of marriage thrown away because of one bad decision. Not one bad decision. 6 months of planning, deliberate deception, coordinated humiliation. And even now, you're not apologizing for what you did. You're angry that it didn't work. Her brother stepped forward aggressively. You think you're better than us now? I think I'm better without you. There's a difference. You arrogant piece of... Careful, I said, my voice dropping to a warning tone. You're on my property now. And unlike the old me, the new me doesn't tolerate disrespect. He backed down, probably the first smart thing he'd done in weeks. You want to know what I learned out here? I continued. I learned that people will treat you exactly as badly as you allow them to. For years, I allowed all of you to treat me like your entertainment, your project, your pet. I thought that was normal family dynamics. I looked directly at my wife. Then you left me here, and I discovered what respect feels like. Real respect, from people who earned it instead of demanding it. I'm not going back to being your family joke. We never thought of you as a joke, her mother said weakly. You literally abandoned me as a prank. You recorded it. You planned it for months. If that's not treating someone like a joke, what is? The silence stretched until her father played his final card. You'll regret this, he said. When the novelty wears off and you realize what you've given up, you'll come crawling back. And we might not be interested in taking you back. I smiled. You're probably right about one thing. In a few years, I probably will look back on this moment. But I won't be thinking about what I gave up. I'll be thinking about what I escaped. They climbed back into their vehicles without another word. As they drove away, I noticed my wife looking back through the rear window, probably expecting me to run after them or at least look conflicted. Instead, I walked back into the cabin and started preparing dinner. I had an early shift at the diner tomorrow and a construction project to finish on the weekend. For the first time in my adult life, I had a future that belonged entirely to me. 6 months later, I bought the cabin. The family who owned it had been trying to sell for years, but the remote location scared off most buyers. For me, the isolation was the selling point. I used the money from selling my old house and car to buy it outright. No mortgage, no debt, no ties to my previous life. My construction business was thriving. Word had spread through the mountain communities about the city guy who actually knew what he was doing and didn't overcharge. I had contracts booked 3 months out, mostly wealthy urbanites who'd bought mountain retreats and discovered they needed serious work. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was making more money helping other people escape to the mountains than I'd ever made in my corporate job. My phone rarely rang anymore. I'd changed numbers and only given the new one to clients and local friends. Occasionally, I'd get an email from my former life, but those were becoming rare. Even my wife had apparently moved on, though I'd heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd told people I'd had a nervous breakdown. Let them think that. It was easier than explaining that their abandonment had been the best thing that ever happened to me. The diner owner retired and offered to sell me the business. I considered it seriously before deciding I preferred the flexibility of construction work. But I did buy the building and renovated it into a workshop for my tools and equipment. On the anniversary of being abandoned, I threw a party. Not a bitter celebration of divorce or revenge, but a genuine celebration of independence. The whole town showed up, bringing food and stories and genuine friendship. These people had accepted me without conditions, without tests, without elaborate psychological experiments. During the party, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I heard you bought a place up there. I hope you're happy. It was her, probably hoping for some sign that I missed my old life or regretted my choices. I looked around at the party, at people who valued honesty over manipulation, work over image, substance over drama, at a life I'd built from scratch using skills I'd never known I had. I typed back, I am. Then I deleted the number and turned off the phone. The party went until midnight, filled with laughter and stories and the kind of genuine human connection I'd forgotten was possible. When everyone finally left, I sat on my porch looking up at stars you could never see in the city. Their joke had been designed to break me down, to prove I was weak and dependent. Instead, it had revealed strength I didn't know I possessed. They tried to humiliate me into gratitude, but accidentally liberated me from a life that was slowly suffocating me. The best part wasn't the success or the independence or even the peace. The best part was knowing that I'd never again allow someone to treat me like their entertainment. I'd learned the difference between people who love you and people who love controlling you. 300 miles from where they'd abandoned me, I'd found something they'd never expected me to discover. I'd found myself. And unlike their twisted family dynamics, this version of me wasn't going anywhere. The joke had been on them all along. They'd thrown away someone who genuinely cared about their opinion, someone who'd tried for years to earn their respect. In return, they'd created someone who no longer needed their approval. I'd become exactly what they'd claimed to want: independent, strong-willed, and unbreakable. The only difference was that now, I was all those things without them.
Our story has come to an end. If you've made it this far, how about subscribing to our channel? It helps us immensely. I've selected 2 other videos for you that I'm sure you'll enjoy. Feel free to click on them. I'll be waiting for you in the next story. See you soon.